Welcome to How Do We Rise, Step 5 in the series How Do We Rise? And in this podcast, we're going to talk about releasing your addictions. Ego loves addictions. It loves excess and immersing itself in immediate gratification. It insists and it demands to have its immediate needs fulfilled. Ego absolutely loves to hide in the inebriation of self-indulgence while stepping out into drama and chaos, harmful actions and reactions, and eventually deterioration and destruction if it's left unchecked. Most people in the world today have at least one addiction. It could be something as simple as potato chips, or talking excessively, or watching too much TV. And then there are the larger addictions, which are sexual addictions or drugs, pharmaceuticals, and raging, abusing people. But I will tell you, ego loves addiction to whatever drug of choice an addict has. So it could be alcohol, it could be cigarettes, it could be drugs that are either from the street or big pharma. It could be food, sex. It could be attention, drama, gambling, excessive talking, excessive worrying, excessive fear. It could be the TV. It could be even excessive dark music, and so on and so on and so forth. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of ways to self-indulge in order to escape and try to deal with life's trials and tribulations, or rather the avoidance of them, because addiction does create an absolute avoidance of dealing with life on life's own terms. But there is a big problem with using excess, any kind of excess, in order to cope or to control, to manipulate, or to manage, or just to avoid life and the emotional equation that goes along with whatever's going on in your life, that you opt to choose to utilize addiction to avoid. So what is that problem? What is the problem that we really have when we talk about having addiction? Because, I mean, addiction is whenever there is excess, there is an uncomfortable pain. There might be a very deep and unchecked anger. There is trauma in there, for sure. There is wounds that need healing. Of course, all of that is happening, but in a deeper way, but simplistic, in a simplistic equation. What is the problem of allowing an addiction to go unchecked? And it's very simple. The problem is the archon frequency, that demonic, satanic, dark, heavy, black frequency that craves our energy. And it craves our sadness. It craves our negative outpouring. And it craves us to be kinetic and chaotic in our emotional bodies, and to be suffering in our physical bodies, to have our minds drifting and suffering and jumping around and unable to be stabilized. And it craves our souls. When we use anything compulsively, when we're operating out of any obsession, when we are dependent, and when we are negative emotionally, that dark frequency, it gets in and it takes over and it wants more. It always wants more. It's like, you know how narcissists are, or people with borderline personality disorder? They are these empty, vacuumless holes, a deep well, and they can never be filled up. An addiction and the archonic frequency are really one and the same. And it's begging, aching, and demanding more of what our minds and our bodies crave once we trip that wire. And what happens is when we enter into addiction, or the the addiction process. We are moving into, whenever we're stepping out into excess and we're not operating out of an equilibrium or balance or some semblance of harmony, what happens is that the archonic frequency takes notice, and it begins to assert itself inside the life, but also inside the mind and the craving within the addiction, compelling and pushing the person to continue to use the drug of choice or the addiction of choice, and then to develop other patterns or other addictions to play a key role in allowing a vacancy. You see, when addiction comes in and the mind is tripped onto that singular focus, that obsession, that compulsion, and the body is also being triggered and tripped on, then the archonic frequency can get in and start wreaking havoc. It's not just the drug, or it's not just the gambling, or it's not just the food, but it is the archonic frequency within all of it that is causing such chaos and such bedlam, and pushing for more and more and more until a person's life disintegrates in and around the addiction. And when we're talking about a person's life, we're talking about the fragility of their body, or definitely the fragility of an addictive mind, the swinging pendulum of the emotions that are going on. And honestly, what happens when an addiction takes over, the soul is dismissed. It's pushed aside. It's pushed in the back corner, the back recesses. And then as the archonic frequency comes in and takes over more and more and more, the soul is it is vanquished. It is held so far at bay that you can't even recognize that it's there. And that's why they often talk about in the program, like AA and NA and that sort of thing, that when you're working on your addiction process, you have to bring in a higher power. You have to bring in something larger than yourself, and something that is unavoidably protective of the sanctity of your healing, that allows and demonstrates this course of love and a higher frequency to rise to. Because if left to its own uncharted course, the archonic frequency will continue to take over until the person is completely usurped and possibly dead, possibly a shadow of itself, but definitely acting through other problems and behaviors, such as robbing or prostitution, stealing, harming others in different ways. And then the family, all of the family suffers from an addictive personality inside the family system. It could be just one person that has an addiction, which is rare, very rare in a family, but let's just say there is one person in a household that has an addiction problem, like a teenage son that's drinking. All right. And then there's two other children in the house, and there's two parents, and everybody's life is circling around the chaos and the mayhem that's happening with the addictive personality, with all the lying, with all the cheating, with all the stealing, skipping school, getting into trouble, ending up in jail, wrecking the car, taking money without asking, beating up on the younger siblings. I mean, it could be so many different things. And so the family goes into a tailspin and a struggle. So it isn't just that an addiction, having an addiction is a problem for one person, or that the archonic frequency is only operating in that person for that person to be destroyed, but it ends up moving through an entire family system, destroying the family from the inside out, and it moves into plaguing jobs and plaguing self-esteem and a positive, healthy trajectory for each individual, but also for the collective whole of the family. So they get that archonic frequency, it gets in, and then it ceaselessly and with more and more insistence continues to want, and it just keeps demanding, because our suffering ultimately is the prize. It is their energetic gold. It's their prana. It's their victory. And it just feeds them. It just feeds them so that the archonic frequency can grow stronger, as opposed to the prime creator frequency, or the love frequency, or the frequency of peace, and so on and so forth. When one dies from their addiction, that's okay, because there's thousands more to take their place. Because ultimately, again, it's just about human suffering. Human suffering is food for them, just like vegetables and fruit and dead animals are food for us. Any and all suffering they cause is just that juice. It's that elation, like the way all vampires feel draining the lifeblood from its victims. They're really vampires. The archonic frequency is the vampire frequency. It just sucks the life out of you. That's why I'm saying, do you know anybody that has narcissism, true narcissism, not just traits, but true narcissism, or people that have borderline personality disorder? Because those two personality disorders are that empty hole, that sociopathic hole that can never be filled with any drug, sex, food, chaos. There's just never ever enough. And that's because the archonic frequency is moving through the person. And so we look at it and we understand that having an addiction and allowing the archon frequency in is a demonic energy that drains the life force from their victims. And it's done with such joy and glee, and it's endless, and it's insatiable. And the desire will never be able to quiet itself until death or recovery. Death consumes the person afflicted, or recovery begins to be established and is held. I mean, there's a reason why alcohol is called spirits. And that's because when you partake in alcohol, and I'm not talking about the occasional glass of wine or beer or drink or martini. I'm talking about when people use it daily to amend all of their feelings within themselves, to place that band-aid and buffer the pain that they're in. So when you're taking and participating in drinking, you're actually allowing the inhibitions, the morality of your mind to quiet down, to not be present and available. Just the high is the most important. And that's when they slip in, those spirits slip in and begin to take over the being. Okay, that's what it is. And we call alcohol spirits, but we must acknowledge that pharmaceuticals create the same effect as alcohol. And of course, street drugs are the same as alcohol. But food and television and excessive sexuality, indiscriminate sexuality, gambling, all of it creates a way in for these opportunists, these dark demonic opportunists. So whatever we do, we must suffocate the archonic frequency. And how to do that is just to first step up and notice that there's a problem going on, and that problem needs to be addressed. And then to start to seek out somebody that is strong enough to deal with the shift that's going to take place, that you're going to have to wade through in order to let go and move out of the addiction process, which can happen, people. I know that a lot of people never recover. I have a family filled with people who never recovered and that passed away from addiction. And I know people that do recover and stay in the program for the whole of their lives, finding meaning and finding success and balance and some stability. And then there are people that have an addiction issue, and by doing the real work, that addictive quality just leaves. You learn whatever you need to learn from it. You've made your peace with it. You don't transfer it to something else. You just focus your intention on driving your life in such a way that is bountiful and pleasurable, and living in a good, harmonious atmosphere within yourself. You have your spirituality within. You're able to move the archonic frequency away from you by bringing and drawing in a higher vibrational frequency of your soul coming forward, focusing your intention and attention on spirituality, and on living a life that is filled with good character. It is filled with dignity. It is filled with laughter. It's filled with love. It's filled with ordinary and simple pleasures, receiving wonderful rewards from just a daily strive to participate in your life and enjoy it without having anybody else, including yourself, have an expense account because of the choices that you're making. So we must choose to suffocate the archonic frequency. And to do that is to bring about a peacefulness inside of ourselves, activity in terms of healthiness, to allow our lives to unfold and have ecstasy, to have brilliance, to have love, to have sincerity and kindness, to treasure and have meaning. What we do is we transfer that dark, abysmal energy, that very low frequency tide that addiction runs on. And I mean, it runs on very myopic, very limited, very low frequency energy. It's only focused on acquiring the drug of choice, enjoying the drug of choice, running out of the drug of choice, acquiring the drug of choice, enjoying the drug of choice, and running out of it until you're acquiring and you're not enjoying it and running out of it, but you're using it just to stay alive and to feed the predators. So what we must do is we must use all countermeasures that are of higher frequency so that we remove their food. We must be free of anything that requires any dependence upon it. And I'm not talking about normal foods, eating your meals, having clothing, having shelter, having a nice warm bed, sharing with friends, sharing with family. I'm not talking about that. But those are requirements, okay? Those are essential requirements in terms of being able to survive and to live your life, to have the energy. But anything that takes your focus and you're constantly mulling over it. When do I get my next fix? When can I drink my next beer? When can I go get the next can of potato chips? Oh, God, there's a pie sitting on the counter. When do I get to eat the next slice? When the mind won't move away from obsessing, right? That's a dependence upon something. So if our addictions is what they want, and our addictions are what they need to thrive on, then we just don't give it to them at all whatsoever. We starve them until they vaporize into oblivion. And one of the things we have to balance in our lives, truly, at this point, for truthers, is that we have exchanged our lack of wakefulness for an obsession in learning and seeking and knowing information about them. What are their agendas? Who are they? Where do they come from? What is our world? Who are we? Let's talk about the vaccines. Let's talk about the GMOs. Let's talk about the chemtrails and the geoengineering. Let's talk about 5G. Let's talk about the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and everybody else, But here's the thing. Knowledge is power, and having as much knowledge and information will change the outcome of your life as we move forward throughout this entire, change of guards from the first beast system to the second beast system, and hopefully the rising of humanity. Our seeking knowledge and our sharing knowledge and discussing it, and our participation in waking up and truthing is a very noble thing to do. It is a very necessary thing to do. Those that will not entertain learning these things are the ones that are going to be injured in the end, because they're not going to have knowledge to know how to, or the information to know how to deal with it as things are coming. However, like everything in a world that deals with duality, spending so much time and so much focus on these matters, these problems, these agendas, these initiatives, the archonic frequency to the demonic, to the satanic, to the Luciferian, to all of it, has become an addiction for many. Where we wake up, and before we even roll out of bed, or when we roll out of bed and we got our first cup of coffee, our phones or our computers, our pads are turned on. We go directly to Facebook or YouTube or Google search or whatever, and we begin our day focused on truthing, focused on writing, focused on sharing information, learning, passing articles along. And then most people spend their entire day doing that. And they forget that they have a spouse or a partner and children and families and houses and everything else. Because the focus, we have transferred our addiction into waking up without harmonizing it and equalizing it in balance. So what we must do is we must look at our lives with this beautiful equilibrium, and to say, I'm going to place this amount of attention to this today, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to place this amount of attention to that. I'm going to sit down with my children without any devices on. Everything's turned off, everything's unplugged, it's wrapped in aluminum foil, whatever, to have your own space and peace. And color with your children and play games with your children. Go outside and go for a walk and go for a hike and do all sorts of wonderful things without a mask. Masks are unnecessary, right? This world is not contaminated. We are not contaminated. Just go out and live your life. Enjoy your children. Spend time with your partner. Have fun. Laugh. Have friends come over. Have a meal. Get together. Have a barbecue. Do whatever. But live your life and do it in balance. Just figure out what you're seeking and what is demanding excess from you, and what's calling and that's craving, this insatiable craving that's inside of you, and then transmute it. Transmute it and let it go until freedom comes into you and takes its rightful position. Like I said, my mother passed away from drug addiction. She was a drug addict when she had me, and so the whole of her life, into my 40s, my mother was an addict. My mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, my nephew, my daughter, all passed away from addiction. I have other family members that are still alive, and their addiction is food, their addiction is anger, their addiction is hate, their addiction is jealousy, the TV, their devices, so on and so forth. And I myself have had an addiction problem too, believe it or not. You all will laugh at me, but I actually, in my 20s, I was addicted to cigarettes, and I knew I had to quit because they made me feel terrible. I started smoking at 10. I quit at 19. And I was clean, and I was doing great. I didn't feel anything till I met a guy, and we started hanging out and dating. And he smoked weed, so I smoked some weed with him. And I was not a big smoker. I didn't like weed too much. I don't like necessarily being high, because my mind and my soul and everything, I don't need to be high. I feel so great just being alive, and seeing the world through the eyes that I have, doing my art, listening to music. There's so many things in life that I just absolutely adore, that I don't need to be high to enjoy or not enjoy. But anyways, I started smoking weed and then I got hooked. And you say, how did you get hooked on weed? Well, I got hooked on weed because I have an autoimmune problem. And people with autoimmune problems tend to have addiction issues, believe it or not. Their bodies struggle to take things, they might have reactions to things, or it clings to and craves things. Literally, an autoimmune imbalance oftentimes causes addiction. That's why they say that they find that addicts have allergies or they have an allergy to that which they are addicted to. But for about 7 years, I was a pothead and a pretty significant one. At times, of course, I went to work, but if I was at work and I knew that I didn't have a bag at home, when I got home to smoke, I was obsessing how to get a hold of my dealer or another dealer or find something on the street. And I would go to every length to go and find a joint for the night, and not prostitution or anything, or not stealing, but I would obsess and obsess until I acquired. And I did get bloated. I did swell up. My life became not so manageable. My life was focused around getting high. And I was a paranoid weed smoker. I couldn't go out. I couldn't smoke and then go out. I couldn't answer the door. I wanted to close the curtains. I was always concerned that somebody was going to know and then the police would come and I'd be taken away. So it wasn't a beneficial journey for me. And finally, I just had friends that got together and said, look, this isn't working for you. Gonna have to cut it out. And I actually went to rehab for it. And I did my 30 days and I got clean. And I remember sitting in one of the last group circles, and the paper or the whiteout board had all these different things about addiction and so on and so forth. And I was sitting back and I was looking at it, and I could actually see everything playing out through my mother with objectivity and understanding. And as I was sitting there, I thought to myself, it's really odd because I didn't have any addiction problem other than cigarettes prior to. And now I'm sitting here, everybody's, in rehab for coke or um, pharmaceutical drugs or mostly coke, and some meth. But back then, I mean, we're talking in the 80s, that wasn't a big deal. Meth wasn't huge then, although we had it and I tried it once, and then I knew I liked it too much, so I knew I'd never do it again. But nonetheless, the thing is I was sitting there, and here I am, the only weed addict, and everybody has these very significant addictions, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here, and what is this all about? And I realized that for me, I needed to learn about my mom from the inside out. I needed to understand her cravings and her compulsions and her obsessions. I needed to understand her thinking. I needed to understand her, where she was tortured, the dark moments, the pain that she was in, what was driving her. And then I can learn from the counselors, and I can learn from, reading the books and whatever and listening to other people. And it gave me an opportunity to really get my mother, to get my family members that were dealing with addiction. But my mother was she was the big suffering, the big pain for me, right? She was my sorrow. Because I was born to a full-blown drug addict, and she never got clean. And so I never really had a mom. I had an addict. I had pills, but I never had a mother. But what was such a wonderful experience was for me to recognize that and not to displace my responsibility for myself, but to understand my journey. And so what happened is I left rehab. I went to this long-term rehab because that's what they said I needed to do, that I had a real problem. And I got there and I'm like, I don't have a real problem. I certainly don't have a real problem. I don't crave getting high. I don't want to get weed or anything like that. And I need to go home. I need to get a job, and I need to get to work. I need to get to exercising again and get, stay fit and stay healthy, and just get my life in order. And I did. I went home. I went back to my acupuncturist. I was exercising daily. I got a job. I went to AA. I did. I didn't like NA. I didn't want to listen to all the drugs. I just went to AA. I started doing my art, started selling it in boutiques and all sorts of things. I took up rollerblading. I lived on the lake. I did my art. I was studying metaphysics quite extensively, and really immersing myself in healing and having a beautiful life. And I never, from that time forward, ever craved drugs again. Never. It didn't mean that I did try weed a couple of times afterwards, just in casual, hey, we're all sitting here smoking. Never craved it again. Never wanted it. Didn't really like the high for me. And so it was just put aside. It was just a couple of times. I smoked a couple tokes. That was it. And I feel that I'm the lucky one. Why? Because I took full responsibility for myself. I healed myself physically. I healed myself emotionally. I didn't squander my intellect, my mind. I immersed myself into passion, which was my artwork. And I stood on my own two legs and started seeking a life that was fulfilling and not things to hide. I wasn't avoiding anything anymore. My mother was my avoidance. And actually, she wasn't even my avoidance. My feelings about my mother and my feelings about my childhood, etc., that's what I was avoiding. And smoking weed really took me out there. Smoking weed really amplified spirituality. I did amazing artwork when I smoked weed. I had phenomenal epiphanies on it and that sort of thing. However, it became a beast because I was seeking it and it was controlling me. It owned me. It owned my mind. It owned my body. So I had to figure out what was demanding from me excess and then transmute it to allow myself to have the freedom that I was seeking. I didn't trade it for any other addiction. I just really sought balance. So it wasn't one thing that I got involved in. It was a myriad of things, So I had my friendships, and I had my exercise, my athletic life, and I had my work, and I had my art, and I had my meeting, and I had my rollerblading, and I hung out with friends. I started dating people. So I really blended my life, moving away from shutting the curtains and locking the door, terrified that somebody was going to find that I was buying weed and smoking it in my paranoia. And I was able to move out and create balance and joy in all the things that were in my life. But I wanted and I chose, with the help of a couple of good friends, to end my relationship with that which was caging and shackling me. And when that drug was actually caging me and limiting my mind to only seeking it, it ended up caging all different parts of my personality. It's made my ego just explode. I was dealing with perfectionism. I was dealing with being a doormat. I was dealing with fear, tremendous amounts of fear, chronic fatigue, just immersing myself in avoidance. So when I unshackled that addiction, I unshackled all of it. And I was in therapy, and therapy that you actually did the work. And I took care of it. Something came up, I took care of it. Something came up, I took care of it. I didn't want to wallow in it. I didn't want to sit and immerse in it. I didn't want to be a broken person. I was not a broken person. It's just, this was shit I was avoiding. Deal with it. I recognized that I was worth it. I want to say to everybody out there that we are worth every ounce of having and owning our freedom, living our lives in peace, and surrendering our lives to this very sweet joy that we can have when we remove ourselves from allowing archonic frequency to come in and to take over, to usurp us. I have seen people in my life that literally the archonic frequency fully came in and shift them so completely that there was nothing left of their own soul. And case in point, my mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law, she was a very lovely woman. She was dominant, and she had her issues, and she had a huge ego and lots of fear, lots of insecurities and that sort of thing. She was a kind person. She didn't do drugs. She was a teacher. Um, and she was very much about her family. She was very much about her job, and she was about herself. She had some narcissistic traits, but they were only traits. She still could give. She still could listen. She was very, very loving at times, many times. Well, anyways, she had surgery where her adrenal gland was taken out, had a tumor, and never expected that. And it just sent her on a road of having to take opiates for pain medication, and it got out of control. She just happened to have doctors that were willing to supply her with the poison. She was very addicted to it. She was taking Valium. She was taking Klonopin, so she was on the benzodiazepines, which were knocking her inhibitions down, because when you take benzodiazepines, it sedates you so much that it drops your inhibitions. It removes impulse control. And people do dastardly things while taking those kinds of medications. And then opiates, they transform you. You could be a nice person, you could be happy, you could be loving on opiates, but whenever it turns on you, and it will invariably turn on a person, that person will become hostile, they'll become angry, they'll begin to lie, they'll begin to manipulate, they'll be taken over and controlled. What we think is just by the drug itself. But I'm telling you, that's not accurate. You're not just controlled by the drug, although you are, but you're controlled by the archonic frequency that is able to slip inside of you and start to take over. So anyways, my mother-in-law was taking these drugs, and I was the only person that would stand up to her and say, enough, you're going to die. Everybody cowed to her. Didn't care that she was addicted, didn't care about all the drugs she was doing, or the fact that she went from 150 to 290 pounds from medication, excessive toxicity. It didn't matter that she was taking the remote control and trying to make phone calls on it. It didn't matter that she was taking the telephone and trying to change the TV channel. It didn't matter that she was slurring her words, or she was falling down, or that she was getting sick. It didn't matter that she was clueless, that she didn't understand what she was saying. All that mattered is that she didn't react to them. All that mattered is that she didn't yell at them or put them down, and so and so forth. And so she was very, being the addict, even though she wasn't an addict her whole life, she still was a dominant personality that had people around her that wouldn't step up to her, that were doormats and that were enablers. Her husband was an unbelievable enabler. He could never ever stand up to her. If she wanted a whole half gallon of ice cream, he went and got it, let her eat it. It didn't matter. And he would go get all of her drugs. So I would stand up for her. I would see that she was sick from the medication, get her to the hospital, where you'd hear her screaming how she hates me and so on and so forth. But all I could do is just keep sending her love and know that the addiction, the drugs, and the archonic frequency owned and possessed her. But I never will forget the last time I saw her. I'm not going to get into what happened, but we had a meeting at a therapist's office. The whole family was disintegrating because of this person's toxic behavior that was bleeding off on the father-in-law that I really loved, who I no longer could be around, and my daughter, who is, I didn't know what was happening when she would go visit them. The abuse that was occurring to turn her against me by her grandparents. But when we called the therapist called the meeting for us to get together, and I'll never forget sitting in this conference room and actually sitting opposite of my mother-in-law. She had Cherokee in her. She was German. She was I don't remember what else, but she was, medium colored, Caucasian skin, and more of a reddish undertone than green. I am olive complected, so I was looking at her when she was sitting there, and she was green. She literally was green. And it was not even olive tone. It was a pea colored, like a split pea color. And her eyes were literally physically squished in around her nose. Like her eyes had moved an inch inward. And they were shriveling and beady and dark and awful. And I remember she came at me it was very venomous. And I stood up and I said, you know what? This is abuse. So I'm not going to deal with this. If you're going to be this venomous, it's evil. I'm not dealing with your evil. My daughter's coming with me. She's not going to see you anymore. If you're going to abuse her and abuse my family because of your desire to take my daughter and my husband away to bring them back home for you because you're on drugs and you're not managing yourself, then quite frankly, you deserve the hell you're living in, and we're out. And I walked out. My husband was with me. He was not somebody who cowed to me. He just walked with me, and I told my daughter that she would have to join me in the next 30 seconds. And the therapist absolutely agreed with my choice. What she was absolutely taken over by the archonic frequency, to the point that she destroyed completely the relationship with me. We removed our daughter from visiting with her again, and she destroyed the relationship with her son, and the sun rose and set on her son for her. And he could do no wrong. She was in adoration of him, and she lost him. And believed in her sanctimonious position, never relenting, never saying she's sorry for all the harm and hurt. Finally, she did get off the opiates. She finally dropped all the weight, got back down to about 155 pounds. And her medication was managed. She was not taking any opiates. I think she was still on Valium. Nonetheless, she, about a year after she came off the drugs, she told her husband she wasn't feeling well. He says, well, you just rest. I'm going to go to the store. I'll come back. And when he came back, she had passed away. And allegedly, it was her heart. However, I think it was that she just gave up, that the archon frequency just absolutely devoured her. I watched this with my mother, who wrapped so many cars around trees, and her husband would continue to allow her to do the drugs, and he would buy her a Lexus and she'd wrap it around a tree. He'd buy her another Lexus and she'd wrap it around a tree. She was deliberately trying to kill herself, and to the point where she was injuring herself, having to stay in wheelchairs and that sort of thing. My mother-in-law died when she was 67. My mother passed away the next year at 66. And it was from addiction. It was from the archonic frequency that was inside of these women that entered through drug addiction. Perhaps with my mother, I don't know, because she was an addict by the time she was 21 when she had me. But I don't know if there was something before that. I believe that she had mental health problems for sure. And it just, the way they handled physical issues was take a person to surgery. There weren't a lot of tests. Let's go in, let's examine, let's put them on opiates, get them through the pain. And they left people on opiates far too long. So, I, like so many people in this world, our family's riddled with addiction problems. And I still have them. I still have family that is still addicted to food. I have family that's addicted to lying, gossiping, raging, tormenting, hating themselves, controlling other people, manipulating. And of course, the other, what you see is, your normal alcohol, drugs, gambling type thing. So, families, the generational traumas, the generational memories, and this, the way that this particular plane of existence, this realm is structured, is around the archonic frequency that's running the show. And that's why all of this stuff exists, in order to compel the body into an addictive craving, and compel the mind to be compulsory and obsessive in order to feed the body. But I will just say this, that I myself I just feel so grateful that I did the work. I did the inner work to let my stuff go. I loved the addicts at a great distance. I stood up to them. I didn't tolerate fools very easily. I was harmed. I was injured by them. How could you not be? But I didn't hold on to it. I didn't wallow in it. And I didn't make their pain and their suffering and their archonic stuff my own. Okay? And when I dealt with my own, I recognized that I was worth every drop and every effort to move forward. And so, whatever it is, I try to manage, and I always manage, to hold everything in balance. I am a little obsessed about projects and building and growing things. I do love that, but that's okay, because everything I'm doing is in a healthy way, and it's healthy places to be and to spend my time in. I could also let it go, and I could do other things. So that's what we want to bring ourselves to, because once we release addiction and we take full responsibility for ourselves, we can allow freedom, we can allow peace, we can allow love and joy and laughter and positive relationships and wonderful things to happen in our lives. So step 5 is about releasing all and any parts of addiction in our lives. Thank you so much for listening to me today. This is Raven White Dove, who is now signing out while rising in love. If you like what you hear, please be sure to like this video. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Subscribe to my channel and go ahead and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. See in the description how you can support my channel to grow, bringing you the best content that I can. Thank you so much for visiting and for your support. This is Raven White Dove, signing out while rising in love.